I'm Beth Finch, and I am talking today with Sandra Tubman. We are at the Brewster Ladies Library in the historic room, and this is March 5th, 2019. So welcome, Sandra. It's so nice to have you here to talk with.
Thank you.
Now, you told me that you had grown up in Brewster, and I think probably your family goes back a ways.
My mother's family definitely goes back to Eastham.
To Eastham?
Eastham. Mm-hmm.
When it was one of the original towns?
Right. My father was from over the bridge a little bit in New Bedford, but they lived on the Cape all their lives.
So what was your father's name?
My father was Roland Milton Hall.
Roland Milton Hall, okay. And your mother's family name?
Cowan. She was Althea Brewer Cowan.
Brewer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that name pops up every so often. I was never sure if it was an old Brewster name or...
It's an old Eastham name.
Old Eastham name.
Yes.
But they lived in Brewster?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know anything about your mother's family?
Mm-hmm. My grandfather, my mother's dad, lived near Ellis Landing, and the house is still there, actually. The house is on the right-hand side of the street going towards Orleans, but it used to be on the left-hand side of the street, and they moved it across the street so that the front was the back and the back was the front. And my grandfather had a garage that he painted cars, and that's what he did. I don't remember a whole lot about him because he died fairly early. I think I might have been maybe 12 or 13 when he died.
So it's easy enough to move the house across the street,
Right.
But turning it around was very difficult.
Not going to happen, no.
Yeah.
But it's still there.
But you did visit your grandmother?
I was brought up pretty much in my grandmother's house as a young child because my father was in the service, and so my mom lived with her parents while my dad was in the service.
So when were you born?
In July 1942.
Okay. So he would have been in the service right then, wouldn't he?
Right.
So when he came home?
Mm-hmm. Then we moved to a house on 6A near Foster Square, and ultimately next door to Faith Ellis and all the Ellises.
You don't know addresses of any of these, do you?
Well, I don't know the numbers. That,
yeah.
I mean, I could certainly find out easily enough, but I don't know what the numbers are.
Are the houses still here?
Yes.
So
yes.
Both of those houses
Right.
that you lived in?
Right.
So you lived in one for a while?
Yes.
And then the other one you really grew up in?
Pretty much grew up in, and then my parents built a house on Underpass Road.
Oh.
And then we moved to Underpass Road.
Well, you've lived all over Brewster.
I did. And then, as my husband likes to say, moved to the right side of the tracks, to Tubman Road.
The old tracks that went through Brewster that
Right.
went over Underpass Road.
Correct.
Okay.
It was fun.
So, was Sanford your husband? His family had been here for a while too?
His family had been here a very long time because they are on Tubman Road, and I guess maybe you'd like to know the history of Tubman
I would
Road.
love to hear that story.
I've heard of people, I'm sure. It's the road. Tubman Road is connects Chatham to the grist mill. That was the main drag because we didn't have 6A. And for whatever reason, this particular stretch of Tubman Road was called Poverty Lane. My understanding is that the people didn't want to pay their taxes and went from there. So one of the Tubman girls, and this is probably 150 years ago, went to a very posh boarding school. Did not like telling her friends she lived on Poverty Lane. So she came home one weekend, put signs up at both ends of the road. It's been Tubman Road ever since, except if you went to Boston to look it up on a map, it's still Poverty Lane.
No.
Yeah.
Well, not only is that interesting, but there's a little part of it. So Cape Cod people sent their daughters to posh boarding schools sometimes.
They did, absolutely.
We were not such a backwater, were we?
No, no, definitely not. I don't remember where she went to school, actually.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I know that.
And there are still Tubmans on Tubman Road.
There were a lot of Tubmans still on Tubman Road, absolutely.
So you were growing up on Main Street
Mhm.
and then on Underpass.
Mm-hmm.
You were the oldest child in your family?
Yes. Mhm.
And tell me, who were the other children?
I had brother Bill, and he was 3 years younger, and then my sister Lanny, she's 5 years younger, and that was it.
Were there other children in the neighborhood when you were
Oh
growing
my
up?
goodness, we had a raft of kids. We had so much
Well,
fun.
what about on Main Street? Were there?
On Main Street, not on Underpass Road so much,
Oh,
but on
really?
Main Street. I probably was closer to teenage years when we moved to Underpass. So the growing up years were Main Street, but there were the Ellis family and the Hart family and several Ellis families and the Dailies. We had a whole lot of kids in the neighborhood. We just all used to play together.
Yeah?
One of my favorite stories is, I'm naming names, but two of the girls across the street from me used to like to steal my doll clothes, and they'd stuff them down their underpants and run and take them home.
You must have had.
And I was really annoyed.
You must have had very nice doll
I
clothes.
did. I had a wonderful aunt who used to give me all kinds of really nice things. That was I remember that well.
So all of this group of children, were you the oldest in this group?
No, the two girls across the street were older, a year older than I.
Okay.
But we played fairly well together most of the time.
That sounds like children.
Yes, right.
So did you have time after school, on school days to play?
Oh, yes. We always would come home and play, and I remember one of the gals, we decided we wanted to ride our bikes to Orleans, but they needed to be fixed. So we fixed our bikes, so we decided we'd get into the business of fixing bikes. We thought we were so smart.
Yeah, and did you?
And we did, and we rode our bikes to Orleans, and nobody thought a thing of it. That's what we did.
The roads were not so busy then.
No, mm-mm. That's true.
And your parents had no objection?
No, heavens no. Nobody worried about
Yeah.
anything.
How did you know how to fix a bike?
I don't know. I have no idea. Can't do it today, but.
So when you were older, did kids have jobs after school?
Yes. And one of the things that you and I talked about briefly before was like the influx of summer people, and that was a good thing because what that meant was we got little jobs. We could clean the cottages, or we could babysit, or there were a variety of things, and I remember it all being as very, very good because next door to Foster Square was Pineland Park, and that was definitely a summer colony of people who had built cottages down there and came from the city to the Cape. And then those people had kids, and we hung around with those people.
Yeah. So there was no big distinction in recreation between townies and summer kids?
Not particularly, a little bit, but in our neighborhood, we all seemed to get along quite well. It was well integrated.
So you didn't work for, I guess there weren't really, well, maybe, were there motels or inns?
There were
in
motels, but
Brewster?
we didn't, there were inns more than motels. I worked for Fran Nickerson. She had Matthew, who was her son, and he was 3, and I was the babysitter.
Oh.
And I took care of Matthew forever. And that was my job.
I expect she was a pleasant employer.
She was interesting.
Okay.
She was interesting, yeah.
So what cottages did you?
I used to clean the Ramsdale cottages in Pineland Park.
Okay.
Helen McGregor had worked for Helen for a little bit doing odd jobs.
Okay. And other kids your age were doing the similar kinds of things?
Absolutely.
So you never worked in a restaurant or?
I never did.
Yeah.
No, I never did.
Okay, let's go back when you were young. What were the games you played? What would you do afternoons or summer days? Or?
Well, mainly we'd make up things, make up games. You know, we didn't have that many games as such. I don't remember having games. We would just make up things to do.
We were looking at a picture of a wedding that you had organized.
Well, it was just plain dress up. We always liked to dress up. And, my sister tells me I organized most of those, which I'm sure I did.
Did you go when you were fairly young, not a teenager? Did you go far afield?
No.
Pretty much in the neighborhood?
In the neighborhood. I didn't.
Did you spend your days at the beach?
Yes and no. My sister remembers spending more time at the beach than I do, but we did go to the beach. We were free to walk down to Ellis Landing and go to the beach, and my grandparents lived across the street and my aunt, so it was no big deal. You'd go there and say, okay, we're going to walk down and go to the beach. No, we didn't have the supervision or the fear. Parents didn't seem to have the fear that something terrible would happen to us.
No lifeguards?
No lifeguards at all, no, none whatsoever.
Did you have boats?
There were boats. We didn't have any, but there were certainly boats.
So your grandparents, is this your father's parents?
My mother's parents.
Your mother's parents?
My mother's parents.
Okay, so they came from East Hammond.
Yes, right.
They followed you to Brewster.
They did. That's right. They did.
What about pets? Were there a lot of pets around?
My dad always had dogs. Always had dogs. That's all I remember.
Was he a hunter at all?
No.
No.
Just always had dogs.
Always had dogs. What kind of work did your father do?
Good question.
Oh, all right.
I'm never sure. My father was a jack of all trades, master of none. Interesting character. He could do a lot of things. He was a very bright man. He went to law school. Didn't do anything with it, but
Was he a fixer?
he was a fixer.
Yeah. Sometimes that's the most important person in the community.
Well, he had a garbage route. He had an ice route. He had what else he did? I can't remember. A variety of.
If I had something broken, would I call him?
You might.
But if I was a friend, maybe not as a commercial thing.
Yes, maybe as a friend more than.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about your mother?
My mom always worked. I always remember her working. That's all I remember she did was to work. She was really a good lady. She worked in the cafeteria at the elementary school.
Oh, really?
And she loved the kids. The kids all loved her. And she all knew what kid needed extra food and which one didn't. A fun story about the elementary school. In the elementary school, the teachers were very much hands-on and involved in everything the students did. And of course, the elementary school was first grade through 8th.
And it was in the building that is now the town hall.
Yeah. Right. And this one teacher, Mrs. Dunn, she was amazing. They had cafeteria duty, so they had to pursue the kids in the cafeteria, what they were doing and misbehaving or not or whatever. And my now brother-in-law, he and I were in the same grade, and he was always a devil. And one day Mrs. Dunn came around and she said, "You don't have a napkin in your lap." He said, "Yes." He said, "I'm not a sloppy eater." So there you go.
Sounds like bad talk to me.
I don't know what happened to him, probably nothing. She probably laughed. But we had a lot more, the teachers were more involved in the school system and the students than probably they are now. It was a very close knit community, I think.
How many children do you think were in your grade?
Well, probably we had 15 or 20.
Oh, that's good size.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So you didn't have split classes then?
No, no, absolutely not.
Yeah. Do you remember who the principal was?
It's Ozzie Burse. Yeah.
And he was pleasant with children.
I guess so. I guess I don't really. I just remember his being there. I
Okay.
don't particularly. I didn't have much interaction with him. I guess I
Well,
didn't have to.
it's not fair to ask someone who was a child at the time, but how old do you think he was when you were there?
Well,
He was just old.
he seemed to be older, but in retrospect, he probably was in his 30s.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's not old, but
No,
when
but-
you're a kid,
Yeah,
it's old.
everything's old, right. Okay. And you talked about the cafeteria.
Uh-huh.
Women worked in the cafeteria and
Correct.
cooked.
Right, correct, from scratch.
Yeah.
Right. Good, nutritious, wholesome meals.
And they were real meals,
Real meals.
not
No
sandwiches.
No, no.
Okay. And your mother was one of them?
She was. She and Hilda Cash.
Okay.
Hilda Cash.
Were there just two?
I just remember those two.
That's a lot of work for two people.
Yeah, well, they didn't do things like now.
Yeah.
They worked.
So they must have been there early in the morning to get everything ready.
Correct.
And then cleaning
Yeah,
up.
yes.
They were probably there the whole school day.
I think so. That's pretty much what I remember.
Huh. So did your mother have other jobs? Maybe at different
Well,
times?
she had other jobs at different times, but she always worked.
What kind of things?
She worked also, well, basically she worked as a cook. She worked at the forestry camp in the state park,
Oh, yeah.
what we call the bad boy camp.
Now that came in much later.
Yes, it did.
60s maybe?
Yes, 60s.
Okay.
But she worked there for a lot of years, until she retired, actually.
Really? And she still cooked for you at home?
Yes, she did. Poor thing. Yeah.
So did you learn to cook with her?
I probably did.
But that was not a...
I don't remember. I don't remember cooking with her. I remember when I think I started to like to cook was in the 8th grade, where we had 7th and 8th grade, we had home ec with Jerry Kroll. And I think that's when I started to like to cook. And I remember cooking for my 16th birthday. I made my own dinner and invited my own friends for my 16th birthday. I think from there on I got into cooking.
She must have been a very good teacher to get you that interested.
Yes,
Yeah?
yes, right, she was.
Did you have other chores around the house, your sister and brother?
I always took care of my sister and brother because my mom worked.
Sure.
So it was always me, but my brother always worked. He worked at the gas station at Foster Square because there was, I'm trying to remember who owned the gas station before Herb Montgomery. Can't seem to, I think probably Murtis Foster owned it, and I'm not sure who ran it. But we lived next door to Murtis. Murtis owned the house that we lived in, and we rented from her. So it was our house, and then Murtis's house, and then Foster Square, where there was always a little grocery store, and there was a liquor store, and the post office, and a Western Union, and the gas station. And that was our center of Brewster.
Sure.
And then on the other side, of the Ellis house, the Tower House, Larry Doyle built a Dairy Queen and a laundromat, which my mother ran. I just remember that. We used to hang out there a lot, but all the kids would hang out at the Dairy Queen.
Of course.
It's a good place to be.
So you told me the buildings of the stores that were in Foster Square. How were they arranged? What did it look
Just
like?
in a one long block of stores.
Along the parallel to the street?
Right. Gosh, I'm just going to say what's there now, but no, they took it all down. They took it all down.
Yeah.
It was parallel to the street.
Mhm. Was there anything behind there?
No, because it was Pineland Park and the beach, and
Right,
they
okay.
were house, some property there.
So now there's a lot of parking in there.
Mhm.
Did people drive there, or did you only go there if you could walk?
No, you could drive. You could drive.
So there was some parking
There was some
there.
parking, absolutely.
What was Mrs. Foster like?
I think she was a good lady. That what I remember. At Halloween, she always had the best candy. That was always good. She had her husband Edgar Foster was a character. He did odd jobs around, and he was always very jolly, very
Yeah.
pleasant.
But she was a businesswoman, I
She
guess.
was definitely a businesswoman.
She had a lot to take care of there.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So she ran the store,
She did.
and she rented out the
In houses, and Phoebe Foster would have been her brother-in-law. She was Murda's Foster. So, and Phoebe was one of the selectmen in the town of Brewster, and he lived behind us. So I always knew him and his wife. One of the things I remember, I don't know if I told you this story, but across the street was another group of Ellises, and they had this gentleman who they hired as a handyman. He lived with them in his own little apartment, and he had some issues, some mental issues. A dear man. And on one of his days off, he decided to take the bus to Boston. So he did, and of course the bus goes into South Station. And so he comes back to Brewster, and he said, I didn't know Boston had a roof on it. He had gone into South Station and never left. He thought that was Boston.
Well, it was very big.
Yeah, really, it
Probably
was.
different stores in there.
That's one of my favorite stories about him.
What was his name?
Yes, I'll tell you in a minute. I almost told you before.
Okay.
I was trying not to do too many names. Do you remember Faith? Edgar. Was his Edgar? He might have been. It'll come to me.
That's all.
I know
Yeah.
him. I mean, he was a character.
Towns need people like that.
They do.
It adds color and humanity.
Absolutely.
You mentioned the Tower House. Is that the one that we know as the restaurant?
Yes.
And that was a private home.
Mm-hmm.
What was the tower?
The tower went up, right up in the middle of
It was just
the tower.
It was just for fun.
I don't remember any rooms in it. I don't. You don't remember?
No, we moved when I was 3 months old.
Really? Oh my gosh. I don't remember any rooms in it except like on the lower level.
I always thought it was just interesting. There was a house with a tower.
Right. I don't know why.
Okay.
Actually, that's a good question. That's a good resource, research question rather. Yeah.
You said that you were renting there and that Mrs. Foster rented out places.
Mhm.
Was it common for people to rent rather than own their homes?
If you didn't have any money, absolutely. There's no other way to do it.
Yeah.
It was a long time before we owned a house.
So which was the one you owned? The one
On Underpass
Underpass?
Road. That was finally, we were able to
Yeah.
purchase the land and build a house.
Did your dad build it?
Pretty much,
Yeah.
pretty much. But my parents were divorced fairly early on. So,
Oh, really?
So he was not always in the picture.
But he did build the house.
I think he did. It seems to me he was around doing
Well,
that.
that's important.
Right, yes. True.
Yeah. So what was the house on Underpass? Is it still there?
Not anymore.
What was it like?
Was it just a typical Cape Cod
Okay.
3-bedroom cottage, not
Okay.
anything spectacular.
Kitchen, living room.
Right.
Okay. What did you think about leaving Main Street where all your?
Oh, I didn't care. Didn't
Oh,
bother me.
really?
Didn't matter.
Because you were.
Because again, we're still a cohesive group,
Yeah.
and nothing was very far away. So you would see these other people at school or in church or whatever activities you were in.
So after 8th grade, you went to.
I went to DY.
You went to DY.
We had a choice.
Uh-huh.
We could go to Orleans or we could go to DY. Now, Orleans was just Orleans. It wasn't
Right.
Nassau. The majority of the kids in my class went to DY.
Oh.
It was reputed to be the better school.
Mhm.
In retrospect, I wish I'd gone to Orleans because it was closer. You didn't get to see friends in DY because my mother only had one car and she worked, so transportation was an issue. So you didn't get to be too involved in too many sports unless you had enough school bus to go back and forth.
There was a bus.
There was a bus.
There was.
We had really good bus transportation. I just remember it being great drivers, great bus drivers, and never an issue. There always was a bus to be able to get to and from.
Yeah. Was there a late bus so you could stay
Yep.
after school?
Absolutely.
So what were you involved with?
I was a drum major. Probably because my boyfriend played in the band.
Yes.
So that works. So, that's pretty much all I did for activities, for after-school activities.
It's hard when you have to catch the bus and
It
get
is.
home and
It is.
yeah. Yeah. So did you work after school?
I did. I worked, as I said, for Fran Nickerson with Matthew from the time he was 3 and I was 12 until she died. I worked for her off and on.
Really?
Mhm.
Doing other kinds of things,
Right.
just whatever she needed?
Whatever she needed. And then I went to nursing school, so that when she was ill later on, I took care of her.
Oh.
And then I traveled with her a lot as companion.
Really?
Yeah, so that was good.
So that's, okay, so moving ahead, that's when you started your travel business.
Well, not really, but it was helpful because I learned a lot from her in doing that.
So after high school, you went to nursing school?
Mhm.
And where did you ever work as a nurse?
I did. I worked at Cape Cod Hospital. I worked on pediatrics. And as I say, I changed to geriatrics. Not too much difference. It's just the age. Did a lot of private duty nursing because then I married and had children, and that worked for me and for my husband. I did some subbing in the schools. I liked doing that because I liked the kids. Pretty much, and then I got involved in this travel business, and for 35 years I traveled.
35.
35.
So how did you organize that?
Well, I worked for the gal who started it. She was a friend of mine, and she started this travel club, and she charged $5 a year, and it was a membership, and she put out a newsletter of what she was offering. It might have been a trip to Boston for a day, might have been a weekend, it might have been, my first job with her actually was a trip to Bermuda. And one of my friends offered to take care of the children so my husband and I could go. And I hadn't really started working for her then, but she said, "Oh, Sandra, there's nobody to do anything to take over. Can you just sort of oversee everything and make sure everything's done right?" And as I'm very fond of saying, being the bossy in charge type person I am, no problem. And there were lots of problems. I don't remember having been in an airport before, and so I had to be in the airport. I had to have a wheelchair. I didn't have to have a wheelchair. One of my clients did. I had no idea about any of this. And when we got to the hotel, there were lots of issues in the hotel, and they're all looking to me to solve the problems. So apparently I did, because when I came back, she said, "Okay, you're going to do another job, and you're going to do another job." So one thing led to another, and I ended up being able to travel all around the world.
Now, you were doing this when your children were still at home?
Yep, yes. But my husband was wonderful. He was really good, and he was very supportive and happy to take care of them and be there, so it worked.
So how old were they when you started?
Oof,
They weren't real little, I
No,
guess.
they weren't. They might have been maybe 10 or 12 when I started.
Okay.
They weren't real little, but.
Well, let me back up a minute. How did you meet your husband?
Well, I always knew his family, and his mother and my grandmother were best friends and went to the Baptist Church. I've been involved in the Baptist Church since I was 12 years old. And Sanford was 5 years older than I, so that kind of put him out of the range. You know, when you're growing up, it's not, he's an old man. And he came home from the service and came to church with his mom, and I was singing in the choir. And he said, oh, she's kind of cute. So he asked me out, and so I went. He had a Volkswagen, and I remember we went to Bill and Thelmer's in Yarmouth. That's a very old place where everybody hung out. And on the way over, for some reason, he told me his eyes were blue. I don't know what anything of it. We're sitting having coffee, and I look across the table at him. His eyes are brown. So that began, he was always very funny, and always, that was just the beginning. So he had a great sense of humor. He was already building a house. I thought, this is kind of nice. So one thing led to another, and after I graduated and got through nursing school, we got married.
All right, so he got you with those not blue eyes.
He did. He did. So the families were very happy. His mother and my grandmother were ecstatic that we got together. Of course, his brother, as I've mentioned, he went all through school with me.
He was your age?
He was my age.
Okay.
Right. He used to pick me up and take me to DY when we didn't go on the bus. And he'd skip school, and I'd take his homework in for him. And then he'd come back and pick me up.
This is the brother?
This is the brother.
The brother is, who's the brother?
His brother, Philip.
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 Didn't just copy your answers, just left.
No, he left. I don't know, maybe. No, I think he had, Philip and I were never connected,
Yeah.
romantically, but one of the other girls in town, Mary Sears, I think she did his homework. So,
This man learned how to delegate.
he did.
Early.
He did. Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
So, lots of fun stories.
Yeah. So you got out of nursing school, and you got married pretty quickly
Right.
after that. Did a lot of nursing for a while.
Yes.
Were you nursing even while your children were growing up?
Just a little.
Just a little.
Not a whole lot.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot.
So you spent a couple of years anyway, just with the children.
Right. But then I got involved in Brewster and doing things in Brewster and Girl Scouts and 4-H and the Baptist Church and actually I was on the board of the library. I was thinking about that probably in the 60s because Fran Nickerson was president for quite a while of the board, and I think it must have been when she probably got me on. I thought it would have been good for me. So. Well, I loved the library, absolutely loved the library. I did a lot of things in Brewster.
What was the library like when you were a child? Did you come here?
Oh yes, it was wonderful. The front door was right here
Yeah.
where we were sitting. This room was was the children's room, and it had the children's books in it. And I forget what the other room was now.
Nonfiction.
Yes, and then we had another room out here which had some tables in it. It was great. It was a wonderful place to be.
Did you come here to do homework?
No, I don't
No.
remember doing homework.
It was a recreational library.
More, that's what I did, or
Yeah.
being on the board, you
That's
do
right.
Whatever you need to do. I remember working at night. They needed help, so we volunteered to be in the library in the evening.
Library was not open so many hours.
No. In fact, when I walked through the door, looked at the hours of things have changed. That's really nice.
Do you have any recollection what the hours were?
No, I'd have to really think
Yeah,
about
okay.
it, but
Yeah.
they were minimal.
Yeah.
But in the summer, I remember the summer hours were like, we were open until 7 in the evening, which was late.
Yeah.
But that was nice. It was nice for people who were here.
Yeah. Well, I went backwards there
That's
for a
okay.
bit.
That's what, that's okay.
So who are your children?
My oldest is Heidi, and the youngest is David. And until recently, Heidi lived next door to me, but she's now engaged and going to get married, so she's living in
Oh.
Yarmouth with her fiance. And my son David, though, lives next door. We gave him a piece of property, and he built a house for his bride. So
All
when
right.
we got married.
So when were they born?
Oh, Heidi was, goodness gracious, isn't that awful? I hate this. It's a trick question.
Sorry.
So,
We can pass over
yeah,
that.
64 and 68,
Okay.
something like
Yeah,
that.
okay.
Yeah.
And
Close enough.
David's a couple years younger.
David was 3 years younger than
Okay.
Heidi. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the things you mentioned were, oh no, I guess there was a 4-H group here.
There was, yes, there was. But that was not, that was more when I was, I was involved when I was like 12.
Oh, were you?
And then I think there's always been a 4-H group around, maybe not as active.
Yeah.
But I think from there I got really involved in the Girl Scouts.
So did you have animals?
No,
No.
my dad had the dogs and that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
it.
Okay. I think, I didn't grow up with 4-H, but I think 4-H is animals, but
More
it's not
animals.
necessarily.
It had other things. It had
Yeah.
other things that you could do too, so.
So you did Girl Scouts and when your children were little, did you do
Mhm.
scouting things with them?
I did.
Were you scout leader or?
I was chairman of the Girl Scouts for the town of Brewster.
Wow.
So I did that for a lot of years.
So there were Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts in the town,
Mhm.
and it was fairly active?
Yes, very,
Yeah.
very active.
And in the church, you said you were in the Baptist church
Mhm.
since you were 12?
Yep. That was one of my other favorite stories is when I lived on Main Street, I liked to go to Sunday school. And it was hard to get my parents to get up on Sunday morning to go to Sunday school. So I organized the other mothers in the town, in the area, to take turns driving us to Sunday school. And I remember one mother saying to me one morning, Sandra, how did I ever get talked into this? Because she didn't like getting up either. But I wanted to go to Sunday school, and it was the only way I could do it.
Well, this is a reverse of the parents insisting that the children go to church.
So it was fun.
So you are an organizer.
Yes.
So as you were older, not a 12-year-old, did you teach Sunday school?
I
you get
did. I
involved
taught
in-
Sunday school. I did the youth group. I directed the junior choir. I sang in the choir. I probably preached. When we used to have Children's Sunday, and I used to preach. I was involved, we had what we called the Golden Links. We were the golden link between the home and the Sunday school, and I was very involved in that. Did everything there was. Was co-chair of the building,
Oh,
the church
really?
building.
And there was a big building
Yes,
worked on
twice.
twice.
Mhm.
Mm. So were you involved in the fundraising?
Absolutely.
And what's fundraising? Do you just go to the congregation and say, you want to build?
I don't remember how we did that. Not like doing the fundraising for BHS, the Historical
Yeah.
Society. That was, I learned a lot more. But that's completely different. It was was different time, different attitudes, ways of raising money. I don't remember how we did it in the church particularly. Except that you had to go to the congregation, and I'm sure there were other ways. There always seemed to
Yeah.
be people who had money who would come forward.
Yeah, who would do a little more.
Right.
But it was a pretty communal spirit.
Yes, definitely. It's a really active church, still is. We did all sorts of community things. We used to have roast beef dinners on Saturday night in the summer. And then the other thing we did, which was extremely successful, was we had strawberry festivals, and we should serve strawberry shortcake. We got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and went to Falmouth to Tony Andrews' farm and picked the strawberries and came home, cleaned them, got them ready while there was another group of women at home making the shortbread. And it was wonderful. And that's probably how we raised a lot of the monies,
Yeah.
was doing those kinds of things.
So when the church was built, or the additions were put, did you use local people? Was it, or did you?
Probably so.
Yeah.
I don't remember that we didn't. I'm more thinking we used people who were local.
If there was a general social life in town, do you think it focused around the churches, or were there other ways of getting groups of people together?
I think probably if you were involved in a church, that was probably a big part of your social
Yeah.
life, whether it was the Catholic Church or the
Right.
Protestant Church. I think that was part of your life. I just remember the schools and the library and the church, it was all connected.
So there's the Catholic Church
Yeah.
and the Baptist Church,
Mhm.
and what other?
Well, we always had the Unitarian Church,
Yeah.
and of course now we have a lot more. The Methodist, and we have Lutheran,
Mhm.
quite a few. Actually, the Lutheran Church, there was a very small group in the, that were from the Lutheran, right across from the Baptist Church in, it's a B&B now.
Oh, the Mans.
The Mans, thank you,
Oh.
the Mans. And they had a Lutheran service in there.
Okay.
So that was always around.
Yeah. Do you remember the Christian Scientist?
And the Christian Science, absolutely forgot. One of my best friends, her mom was a reader in the Christian Science Church.
Was the Christian Science Church important in town?
Wasn't one of the upper coming
Yeah.
ones. I think the Protestant Church, the Baptist, and the Catholic Church, the two
Okay.
churches.
Yeah.
Because we had the little Catholic church in East Brewster.
Right.
And that was the only Catholic church. And my friends that were Catholic, I always remember walking with them. Well, they went to catechism and we went off and played until they got through. They came
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Every area seems to have a predominant political bent.
Mhm.
Was that true around here, did you think, in the times when you, I'm not speaking about currently so much, but in the times you were growing up and you were with your younger children?
Probably. I don't know that I was necessarily all that involved then.
Okay.
As I said before, my father was a very bright man and very involved in the town, and he was one of the first people who thought zoning would be a good thing. He was not popular for that thought, because people thought, well, this is my property, yeah, you're not going to tell me what to do with it. But he saw the value in having limits to certain things so that you kept the character of your town. And that's pretty much, I remember his doing that.
Was he on planning
He
board
was
or
on some,
select
I
board?
can't remember, he was not ever a selectman, but he was on, I think, probably the planning board. Wouldn't be surprised if that was it.
So when he was talking about zoning and trying to get the town interested in some sort of zoning planning, what period of time would this have been?
Oh, I don't know, I would probably have been 15 or 16.
Okay.
Maybe even a little before that. I don't really remember.
We're still talking about zoning.
That's right, right. That's okay. At least we're talking.
Did your father stay in town after your parents split up?
No, he pretty much lived in Hyannis.
Oh, okay. Okay. What about during the Korean War or Vietnam? Do you have memories of what the atmosphere was like in town?
Yeah, that was really tough, because Skip Daly, who was my classmate and I grew up next door to, He was in Vietnam, and he was the first person to be killed and to come back, and I can still see the car coming through town. We all knew what it was and why it was, and it was still difficult to think about that. He was a really nice young man, very bright. He had a great future ahead of him, but apparently he died saving his men in his platoon. So we think about Skip a lot.
The population was much smaller,
True.
and it was a trauma for the whole town, I
Very
think.
much so. Because his mom, Dot Daly, was a teacher. His dad was a Cushman driver. He had a Cushman truck. He drove around and delivered products. So they were well known in the town. And they were just a good family.
Yeah.
It was a good family.
There were other young men who were in the war?
Yes, a couple of them, but they came back. They were not killed, but they came back. I don't know what happened to them, actually.
Yeah.
Skip was the first and made a big impression.
Yeah, there's a memorial to him somewhere.
Yes, well, one of the things they do, they have a scholarship for Skip, and the Cape Cod 5 handles it, and they've helped a lot of young people with their college.
Yeah.
Including my granddaughter. She was a recipient.
Yeah.
She was thrilled.
That's very nice.
It was really nice.
Yeah. I wonder if I could just get sort of a picture of the commercial Brewster back a ways. Do you remember what stores or restaurants or businesses that were thriving?
Wow.
Did your family ever go out to restaurants?
No.
Never?
No.
When you were
I don't
growing up?
ever remember going out. No.
But when your children were young and you were...
Not too often.
No, it wasn't the
we didn't.
common thing as
No,
it is now.
we didn't do that. But we had Mary and Andy's, which is the Brewster coffee shop now.
Yeah.
And Mary and Andy's has been there forever. Their daughter, Audrey, was my best friend in grammar school, in elementary school. And we used to walk across the street from the school to her house to play and get an ice cream after school. And Ozzie Verse lived right on the hill, right beside the Brewster coffee shop. And they were very popular. I think the gas station across the street was there. That seems to me it's been there for a long time. Because the gas station at Foster Square was pretty much the hub of what was happening. On the other end of Brewster there wasn't very much. There was
Nevins?
well, Nevins was towards Dennis.
Okay.
I was thinking Orleans, but yes, we had Nevins and we had the Jolly Whaler
Yeah.
that did pizza and had beer and wine and whatever, and they had the cottages there. But that wasn't quite as much of the hub as Foster Square was. That was pretty much.
Yeah. So, Mary and Andy's, did it stay open all year?
I remember it all year round.
Yeah.
I don't remember that they closed.
It wasn't a seasonal business.
Not that I remember.
The Brewster Inn, the Chowder House?
That's been there a very long time. I don't remember much about that.
Okay.
It was more the woodshed
Yes.
for the young people, but the inn operated as an inn, obviously, for people to stay. We had several inns across the street. There was an inn, and in that same area, there was a little red house. That was the telephone. That was the operator where the
operator.
telephone worked from there.
So where's this little red house?
It's right across the street from what is now Spinnaker's. It was
Oh.
directly across the street. if you know Bamberg House.
Yeah.
Okay, it's right there before you go up into Bamberg.
So there's a little house there, is that the
That
house?
red house is the house.
Used to be Rose Forge.
Rose
Yes.
Forge, yes, it was Rose Forge, you're right.
So
That
there's
was
there's a Verizon office somewhere around there.
Further down,
But that's not, it was the little red house.
right. The operators were in there doing their things.
What about, oh, you were gonna tell me about the telephone.
One of the fun things about the phone, which was, well, everybody had party lines, of course. You know, you could always hear when someone was talking, what they had to say. But when you'd come home from school, if your mom wasn't there, you'd just ring and say, "Where's my mother?" And she'd say, "Oh, she's down visiting with your aunt." So, okay, she'll be home in a little bit.
And this is Mabel.
Mabel, that was Mabel.
Mabel what?
I want to say Coughlin, but I can't, I'm not, I
Okay.
wouldn't be 100% sure on that.
What about Chillingsworth?
Chillingsworth I remember as being a very, very high-class restaurant.
But it was there.
But it was there. Well, before that, the reason it's called Chillingsworth is because the person that owned that house, his name was Chillingsworth Foster. And that's why you got Foster Road. And before it was Chillingsworth, Dr. Rene Murad lived there
Oh,
and operated his office out of there. And then it became Chillingsworth, and the two gentlemen that ran it, I can almost tell you their names, Stevenson. The other one is escaping me, but I mean, that was really, really high class. It was years before I ever got through the door.
so was it open year-round?
Probably for a while, but I don't really remember it in the winter, particularly not going.
What about where Latham's is?
Latham's used to be a restaurant. Crowley owned it. And it was a very, very nice restaurant as well. In fact, my brother saved his money, and when I was 13 or 14, he took me to dinner there. It was, I remember sitting on the porch with him. It was so nice, and it was one of the best restaurants around.
Yeah, lovely.
It was just, it was
Now, was
marvelous.
High Brewster around?
Oh my gosh, yes, I remember High Brewster quite well.
Okay.
We did go there. That was a blast. Unbelievable. It was the concept was you went, you had to have a reservation, but if you knew Bill and Walter, you got in. It was pretty much like a club. And the members left their booze there, so they always had their booze. And the food was fabulous. You never knew what it was going to be, but it just whatever Bill cooked was there.
So there wasn't a large menu?
No, I don't really remember a menu particularly. It's just, but it was great. It was such fun, and it was so gorgeous on a summer night to sit out and look over the pond.
It's an old house.
Very old, yes. It was in one of Sally's books in the Widow's War. I can't remember whose house it was.
Winslow, it's a Winslow house.
It was the Winslow, thank you. I remember that. So it's been there a while.
Well, you grew up in East Brewster, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember anything about Blueberry Pond? Or
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah?
Oh my gosh. We used to walk down there all the time and go blueberry picking, and we used to swim in the pond. It was beautiful. It was clean and fresh, and
Were there really blueberries around?
oh, there were tons of blueberries. And there were mayflowers. And now mayflowers are really rare. I don't know of anybody seeing mayflowers in many years. I haven't heard of anyone finding any, but there were mayflowers there. I used to pick those. But it was great. It was.
So who owned all that land?
I don't remember who owned it.
Okay.
My aunt and uncle lived on the road down to Blueberry Pond, and it was nothing but wilderness.
Was it trees or was it all
It was
fields?
trees, and
Oh,
it was
okay.
trees and bushes.
So it wasn't just open, like
No,
pasture land
no.
or something?
Mm-mm.
Okay. But lots of blueberries.
Lots of blueberries.
Around the pond or all through the woods?
I think all through the woods. I think through the woods. It was neat.
So did it freeze in the winter?
I don't remember Blue Pond freezing, but I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised.
Did you go skating?
I didn't go skating. One of the things we did do was we used to go, quote, skiing, like on one ski, at the golf course, at the Brewster Golf
Oh,
Course, which was on Golf Course Road, which is now Thad Ellis Road. And that was the golf course was up there.
Yeah.
And we used to go sledding and skiing on that. I don't remember so much about the ice skating. We used to ice skate on the cranberry bogs, actually,
Okay.
come to think of it. So we had one behind our house.
Much safer.
Much safer. Always made me nervous to go on the ponds.
Do you remember Seapine School?
I absolutely positively do. My best friend, whose mom was the Christian Science Church, they lived right next door to the Christian Science Church, she went there.
Oh.
And I'm still very much in touch with this girl. She lives in Western Mass now. And I remember it well. And was allowed to go in to one of the events, special occasions. But it was very strict girls' school. And Phyllis, my friend, went there because her dad was the caretaker.
Oh.
So she got to go.
So did it turn out young ladies, or
Yes.
did it turn out educated women?
Young ladies, I think they turned out young ladies. I think they wanted them to be educated, of course.
Uh-huh.
That's, of course, there's also been there a very long time.
Do you remember the fire?
Only vaguely.
Okay.
Only vaguely. Not to really say I do.
Yeah. Right. That's a big part of Brewster.
Yes.
Yeah. Were there, other people have mentioned that there were dances at different times in different places.
Yes.
Did the school sponsor things?
The
or?
school did. When the school put the addition on, which is the auditorium now, we used to have dances in there all the time.
Really?
And we used to have dances at the old town hall where the senior council on aging is.
Upstairs?
Upstairs.
And who would sponsor these?
I have no idea.
They were just there.
I just happened, you know. Just when you're a kid, you don't pay any, you just know. You just
right.
know.
So is it like every Friday night, or?
Possibly.
But it was something you'd look forward to.
Sure.
And it was regular.
It's regular, yes. Again, I think we did the town. We did more things like in the summer because we had people here and you wanted to have some attractions.
Yeah,
I see. I remember more things happening during the summer.
Yeah.
Than any other time.
Well, you're busier too,
Right.
going to school and
True.
all of that.
Right.
Tell me about some people, maybe. Do you remember Donald Doan?
I remember Donald Doan very well. I was probably one of the few people he let go upstairs to see his dolls.
Really?
He didn't let very many people go
Did you
upstairs.
have to bring your aunt's doll clothes?
No, I didn't have them because my friends ran away with them. And his Donald's mother, Beulah, used to do all my alterations. She was amazing. She was amazing. She was like 19, she was still doing it.
She lived a long time.
She did. She was a nice lady.
Was she
Very nice lady.
more welcoming, perhaps, than her son?
I think so, yes. I always enjoyed going to Beulah's and having chats with her. She was a
So
nice
this was
lady.
not in the store, this was...
No, it's at their house on,
Where was-
on 137. Yeah. Same house. I mean, the house is still there. Paul Sullivan lives in it now.
Oh, okay. Did you know Roland Bassett?
Oh my gosh, yes, because he's related.
Oh, really?
He married Margaret Tubman,
Who?
it was Roland's wife.
Okay.
And so we knew Roland forever.
So Margaret is...
Margaret was Margaret Tubman Bassett.
So is...
She was Myron Tubman's daughter.
Oh,
Myron
okay.
Tubman being Raymond Tubman, my father-in-law's brother.
Okay.
So we had a number of Tubmans on Tubman Road.
Yes.
That's one of the, also one of the reasons for being Tubman. But Myron had Joyce and Jeff and Margaret and Andy. And Margaret obviously married Roland, but my mother-in-law, Sarah Tubman, pretty much raised Margaret.
Oh,
Because Margaret's mother had some mental issues and she wasn't always around. So Margaret was always in the Tubman family, so lovely, wonderful lady. Wonderful lady.
so the Bassetts had the ice house and other businesses?
I always remember Roland with the ice business, but I think he had a garbage business at one point. It's interesting how the funny things come back when you start to talk about them. You know, I hadn't thought about some of these things. But he was very much a part of the town.
So there was an iceman, Mr. Bassett or somebody,
Yep,
who would deliver ice for
Yes.
your ice box.
he would. He would.
And everyone had an ice box.
Pretty much.
And did he just know who needed what?
He did. I don't ever, he just would show up and put the ice in. There you
Okay.
go,
They just come, put the ice in and
Right.
say, thank you and leave.
50 cents, okay? That's it.
Okay.
That's what he did, yes.
You mentioned Phoebe Foster. Do you have any particular memories of him?
Just he was a character, but very involved in Brewster and wanting it to be a nice town and running it.
He was a builder.
He was a builder, yes, and I think he built really nice houses, as I remember. He was a very good builder. Nice man, I don't remember anything.
Do you know the Coakleys?
Yes, of course. Of course, Arthur Coakley was the postmaster,
Okay.
and Emily, his wife, they had 2 boys which were near in age to me, so I knew that.
There was a woman who ran the gas station right on the
Yeah,
corner.
Gervais, Agatha Gervais. She was a character, and actually the house she lived in on 137 was a Tubman house. And I can't remember which Tubman was living there, but Agatha and her sister lived in that house, and Agatha ran the gas station. She was a character. And she hustled. She got out there, she'd pump your gas, she could do anything. Clean your windows. She was great. Yeah, it's interesting.
And she did it for a long time.
She did it for as long as I can remember, she was there.
Small woman.
Very small. Mm-hmm. Yep. She'd get up on a box and break the window.
I keep hearing stories about the goat lady.
Oh, yes.
I've never figured out. She just had a goat? What?
Well, there's lots of stories about the goat lady, and she lived on the other end of Tubman Road. I don't know any of them that are necessarily true. There are lots of just stories. It was said that she was extremely brilliant and also quite beautiful, and her husband was extremely jealous, and so she said, well, I'll take care of that. And so she made herself as unattractive as possible with layers of clothing, and that it's been said that she slept in, and that she had goats, and that they slept in the house too. I have a vague recollection of a husband, but not a lot. I remember her because she used to walk everywhere in town, so she walked around. Didn't have any interaction with very many people. I don't think I ever spoke to her. I just knew
You just know who she's.
knew she was there and who she was.
Well, again, the towns need characters.
We had a
do.
few.
Yeah.
Well, Walter Babbitt was a character, but he was a good character, and he bought that house right at the end of Tubman Road and rehabbed it, and he was a mover and a shaker in the town of Brewster. He was really wonderful. He and Cliff did a lot for the town of Brewster.
I know they did. Can you tell me anything in particular?
Oh my gosh. I think he was very involved in the Historical Society.
He gathered a lot of information.
He was very interested in history and the background.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
He developed archives for the town.
Yes, he did. Very bright gentleman.
Entertaining.
Very entertaining. Irreverent. Great sense of humor. And I think for the time that he and Cliff lived there, Brewster was very welcoming to them as two men living together. That was not heard of. I never heard anyone say anything negative.
There were other male couples
Yep.
in town.
Bill Baxter was one, and he did a lot for the town too.
Mhm.
He and his partner Alan loved Alan. He was great.
Even got elected selectman.
They did, yeah. So that's a good thing.
Yes. So I'd asked you before about the political feeling in the town, but there was a social sense of acceptance.
I think so. I think so.
I'm not trying to put words in your
Yeah,
mouth.
no,
I'm just listening to what
I
you
don't,
said.
I don't know. You know, I don't remember any negativity, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Maybe just because I never thought it.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Well, we have Brewster in Bloom, and we have, various things around. The garden club decorates Christmas things. Were there festivals, Christmas traditions, anything like that?
One of the fun things was, again, at the Council on Aging, when I was a kid, a Christmas party, and Santa Claus came, and every child that went got a
Of course,
present.
that was the town hall.
That was the town hall.
Right.
And
Every child got a present.
Every child got a present. And it was, you looked forward to doing that party and having that event there. I don't know, remember.
Was there a Grange?
I don't remember Grange. I
No.
think there might have been
But it
one,
was
maybe
earlier.
in Dennis or in
Okay.
Orleans, but I don't remember that
Okay.
at all.
Well, this has been great. You have another story you want to tell us?
There's probably lots of stories. One of the fun things is when my brother-in-law, he was kind of a hellraiser, and we only had one cop in town.
Now, is this Philip?
This is Philip.
Who got the
This is
girls to
Philip.
do his
Yeah.
work? Okay.
And there was only one cop in town. And so when they were out driving around, they saw the cop go towards Dennis, they could go like a bat out of hell to Orleans, because they knew they weren't going to get stopped.
So who was the policeman?
Well, there was McGlashan, and then Save the Moor.
Yeah.
And then we started to get a few more
Yeah.
in town. But the unfortunate thing is, one night that did happen, and they were racing to Orleans, and one of the gentlemen got killed. So that was not a good
Wow.
thing. I remember that, thinking that's so sad.
It makes a good story until it's not.
It was all fun and games, but then
Yeah.
there's so many things like that happens. But the point is that you only had one cop in town, and so you kind of watched to see where he was, and then you could go into whatever it was, little mischief. I don't think the mischief we got into was anything compared to what happens today. They would go through, well, of course, on Underpass Road. The reason it's Underpass Road is because we had an underpass, because the train went over and the underpass was very narrow. And the guys would like to try to go through the underpass as fast as they could without hitting the sides of their car. They did that a lot. Especially when I was living on Underpass Road.
Oh, so you...
Yeah, so, that was fun. I think I have this photo too with Steve Jones, has the photo of the underpass in his office. It's really cool to see.
Yeah.
If you have no idea, it's amazing to see that photo.
There's one in Barnstable. Is it different from...
No, it's pretty much the
Pretty
same.
much like that.
I think underpass is not as high,
Oh,
but that one is very much like Barnstable, very much.
nice,
Yeah.
nice.
So.
This has been so much fun. I knew it was going to be nice talking with you, but this has been...
Thank you.
Just
Thank you for
wonderful.
asking. It's a little scary thinking I remember all these things. It's kind of, and I'm sure other people that will remember some things similar or a little different. And so many times you think what you hear may not be true, or maybe a portion of it. It's like anything else. It gets carried along.
There was a professor who said, if it's a good story, it's true.
Okay. Well, I know some of these really are true, so.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Beth. It
It's
was
been
fun.
lovely.